Hello everyone and welcome to the Dakota Interviews here at Bismarck State College. I'm Clay Jenkins and today I'm interviewing Superintendent of Public Instruction in North Dakota, Kirsten Baesler. Welcome to the Dakota Interviews.
It's very nice to be here, Clay.
So, you have one of the great jobs. How did this happen? This was 2012.
Yes, I do. Thank you for phrasing it like that, because that's exactly how I feel. I have a great job. I'd say one of the best there is. And how did it come about? You know, it's not like I woke up one day and said, I want to be the state superintendent. It certainly isn't that, you know, as I was a third grader in Flasher Public Schools, that I thought one day I want to grow up to be the state superintendent. I think it happened through an evolution of events and experiences, and one door opened to the next door, to the next door, to the next door. And you know, I always tell my students and people that come to the Capitol, or when I go out to visit with students out in the school districts, you always prepare yourself for your next opportunity. You don't know what that is or where it might be, but I think the way that you prepare yourself for that is to continue to seek opportunities to educate yourself, both formally and informally. And I think volunteering is a major component of that through opening doors. And so the course of events that led me, of course, I started out in education and was a classroom teacher, and then a media specialist, a library media specialist, very proud of that, and then was a vice principal at the Bismarck School District. And during that time, I was also raising my family in Mandan.
Three sons.
Three sons, yes, three sons. And I was raising those three sons over in Mandan and very involved in their education system. And, you know, through just the natural evolution of things, I, of course, was a PTA president. And as a PTA president, then I started thinking about, well, there's ways that we should improve not only my own school, but the school district. So I started attending school board meetings, and I was actually just visiting about that this morning. One of my first political activist issues was I was working at Saxvik Elementary School in Bismarck, and they had a school breakfast program. And my son was, I think my oldest son was maybe a first grader at that time, second grader. And I thought, goodness, you know, my kids eat at home and they have breakfast before they go, but I think that there's probably a lot of his classmates and a lot of his schoolmates that don't. And boy, if it's good enough for one city in North Dakota, why don't we have it? And so I brought that to the PTA that I was president of at the time and said, let's see if we can get this out at Fort Lincoln Elementary. And so, of course, the first step was to make sure that we had enough support in our own school, and then the work began on trying to convince the school board to fund it, and that was a process. So that was my first attendance at school board meetings and first foray into the knowledge of policy making for schools. And again, community involvement led me to some other political boards and some other community boards, and it ended up that I was elected to the Mandan School Board, and I served on that board for 9 years.
And I think for 7 you were the chair.
I was the school board chair for 7 years. So my peers elected me to lead them, and that was a real honor for me to do that. And so through that experience, and at that point in time, I was, during that entire time, I was an administrator in Bismarck and a teacher, and so, and a policymaker and an appropriator, if you will, on the Mandan side of things. And those experiences folded together really provided, I think, what is the most rich experience for being state superintendent. Being a mother made me a better teacher. Being a teacher made me a better administrator. Being an administrator made me a better school board member. So all of those things complemented each other.
How ambitious are you? Because from, in a certain way of looking at it, you could say, here's this young woman who's moving from strength to strength and office to office. The last guy who was in your role is a friend of mine. I think he was there for a long time. I think it was 172 years, or was it 312 years? A long time.
Yes.
Are you going to coast out in this job?
Am I going to coast out?
You're going to spend the rest of your career in this?
You know, when I look back and reflect, it's funny, I've just often thought that and have been asked that question recently. When I look back on the positions and the roles, my entire career has been education. But as I look at what I set out to do and how I set out to do it, with no pre-planning that goes in, what I've noticed is a pattern. About 10 to 12 years is what I have recognized has been what, as long as it's taken me to put the systemic change in place that I've wanted to, and to make it permanent enough as part of a culture where it's not just stretched for a couple of years and then in absence of that leadership or that person, that it rubber bands back. So that is my goal, and that is my desire. And so I suspect that it would probably be the same with this role, with this job. About 12 years would be about how long that I would think I would need to be in place for that to become a cultural change, and for those changes and those initiatives become permanent enough that regardless of the person in that leadership, the culture and that leadership goal and vision is still in place.
Can you talk a little bit about what it is about education that makes you and others like you do things that can't be monetized, that require sleeplessness? Mm-hmm. My mother was a teacher. She would stay up till 10, 11 at night grading these papers, and my father would get angry and say, "You're only paid $22,000 a year. What are you doing?" Mm-hmm. What is it?
Boy, I think that it's a sense of our disposition naturally. It's who we are naturally. Just we're caring, we're nurturing, we're giving, because you get such gratification and such a sense of fulfillment when that first time that you see that it's bigger than you, that your actions go beyond you and live on further.
Tell me a story about this.
I had a student that was at one of the elementary schools here in Bismarck, and he had a challenging life. He had a real challenging life, and school was his best place and his safest place, and I didn't really understand the full extent of what we meant to him as his school family until he had sought me out. He was a second grader, and he came and he told me how proud he was of the fact that he had gotten his siblings ready for school that day, a kindergartner and a first grader, and he was the oldest in the family as a second grader. And he came into my classroom and he was so very proud of it, and he served him popcorn and ice cream. And he had learned in my library that day that it was the vegetable group and the milk group. And he was very proud of that, and it gave me a sense of understanding that that one piece of information empowered him to do something. Obviously not to the extent that we would hope and that we knew he grew to be.
But this was his moment at that point in his life.
His moment at that point in his life, and we at school had been the only people that had offered that to him. And that was the sense of understanding how important we were to so many people. Mm-hmm.
Do you wish, when you sort of dream about education, that it were our fantasy of 1952, that they're all buttoned up and well-fed and they come in and there's no shenanigans and it's really just about curriculum?
I do. I mean, don't we all long for that? But there's the term that I'm going to steal from Jamie Vollmer's, and he does a lot of writing about education and business, and he calls that nostalgia.
Nostalgia? Meaning we forgot and we're nostalgic.
50% nostalgic, 50% amnesia.
And so that's a great term. Say it again.
Nostalgia.
And his name is
Jamie Vollmer's.
And he says basically we have a myth of what education was.
Right. There were just as many ill-fed, ill-equipped students living in poverty without strong support systems in the 1950s and the 20s and the 1900s as there are now. We just are more aware of them maybe. We've taken a greater role in saying that's not okay. We had a system in education previously, and not too long ago, even when I began in my educational career, I call it the sift and the sort.
What does that mean?
It means that teachers presented information, and those that we sifted and sorted, we presented it maybe 2 or 3 times, and we began to sift and sort in late elementary school. Those that got it, those that didn't. Those that understood it and could learn, we sifted to the top, and we sorted out the rest. And we let them basically fend for themselves. And suddenly about, I would say, the beginning of this century, we began to say,
of this century, after 2000.
Yes, exactly. We began to say, no, that's not acceptable anymore. And we as a nation, we're not going to be able to have a third of our students that aren't successful. It is now the responsibility of educators to adjust to the way that our learners are. I believe that for the most part, the majority of our educators in this state say every child can learn.
That puts an awful
Graduated.
lot of pressure on the system and on teachers who are working flat out to do this.
Flat out.
And to say that and somehow it's your responsibility if this fifth of the class can't keep up, that's a pretty heavy burden for people who are already working more than really they're being paid to do.
I would agree, but you'll read the media, and you know, I know media, like the mainstream media, traditional media, they have 3-minute news briefs, they have, you know, 3 inches to write about it, and you look at the trend over the last 15 years, it has been about our failing school system. And it isn't. Again, this anesthesia. Our graduation rates are higher in this nation than they've ever been. So high school diploma means not only that you're ready to go out and do a trade or go out to begin your work life, it has to mean college ready.
You said you need 12 years or a longer period to establish this, and so you can walk away and know that it's not just going to be the latest wave.
Right.
So what is it that you want to accomplish in your tenure, and how do you get there? So give me the list of things you want to accomplish.
Early childhood education.
What does that mean?
That means that we prevent that learning gap from ever being created. Right now we have students in North Dakota, young children in North Dakota, that have great opportunities for exposure to rich academic environments. And then we have a population, a segment of our population, who don't have the benefit of that because they may be from a single home or, there's lots of research done about, by the time a person, or a young child living in poverty reaches the age of 5, in comparison to his wealthier middle class student peer, that middle class or wealthy 5-year-old has had 3 million more words spoken to him.
Wait a minute. So person of great poverty or difficulty compared to a person from a more affluent household is in a 3 million word deficit.
Yes. And it's
how do you ever undo that?
And that is why preschool, that is why early childhood education is so critically important, because by the time if that young person has not been in an academically rich environment through the nature of their home, they've got to get into an academically rich environment during the day. And we're not talking about, you know, pulling a child from their parents' arms. It's those students, those children whose both parents are working and they're in a daycare setting anyway. So let's just make sure that those daycare settings have pre-K opportunities instilled in them.
How would you do it? What's the mechanism and what does it cost?
Well, I'll tell you what it would cost to do it for every 4-year-old in North Dakota. It would cost about $12 million.
Per annum?
Yes.
So $12 million.
Well, for biennium.
So $6 million per year would cover every 4-year-old in the state of North Dakota.
Yes.
And that would, in your opinion, make a measurable, even dramatic difference.
As a fiscally responsible person, I would say that return on investment would be incredible.
What's the argument against this?
Traditional, the typical ones, the ones that I've seen for the last 20 years. Erosion of the family foundation. The overextension of responsibility for social programs to younger and younger and younger. The cradle to grave dependence on the government. And so those were the typical ones.
All right, so that's number one on Baesler's list. What's two in your 12-year tenure, should you get it?
Is more advanced placement courses.
What does that mean?
Advanced placement courses are very challenging and rigorous courses, most often in, well, your social sciences, and your maths, and your English. Pre-calc, exactly. So we're
advanced
talking
English.
Yes, and it's called advanced placement calculus, advanced placement economics, and so it's coursework, and it's put together by the College Board, so a nonprofit association, and it's consistent across the nation. So if you have an advanced placement calc class in Fargo, North Dakota, it's going to be the same as it is in Atlanta, Georgia. And then at the end of that course, you're able to take an advanced placement exam. And if you score, I think for calculus, if you score a 3 or higher, it is college credit for you. And so across...
It displaces the need to take that in college.
Exactly.
Oh, that's amazing.
Exactly.
So where are we doing with this?
Yeah. Well, I was able to secure $1.2 million from our legislature to provide more training for our teachers, because we have some pockets of advanced placement teachers across the state, but of course it's not scaled out. So I want to...
Scaled out means available everywhere.
Available everywhere. So what I want to do is if you're in Rugby or Rolla, I want to be able to have that. You have the opportunity. And it's the number one request that I've gotten as I travel around, visit with the Boy Staters and the Governor's School attendees and the Girl Staters and even our leadership academies like the Hobie academies. One of the things when I give them question and answers, I always, every time get asked, when can, I've maxed out all my dual credit classes that are available at my high school. I've taken the advanced placement classes that are available for Center Through Distance Ed. When can we get more? And so I knew early on that there was a hunger for it and there was a need for that. And so secured these dollars. I'll be training more teachers. We have a summer institute that's going on this next week. No, actually 2 weeks right after the 4th of July, one in Fargo. Next week after that it will be in Bismarck. So we'll do that. We'll work with the Center for Distance Ed, so even if you don't have an AP Calc teacher in Flasher, that you have the opportunity to take it from the Center for Distance Ed through our virtual online high school in North Dakota. And what's really exciting is something that I've been working on closely for the last 2 years, and it's coming to fruition. We have an interested philanthropist that is very interested in North Dakota for a multitude of reasons, that has worked with a group called the National Math Science Initiative that has proven success in increasing the number of students that take AP and the number of students that pass AP exams. And they are working, and there is a private donor that's looking at investing multi-million dollars into North Dakota to help me do this.
Why does this make such a difference? Because some people think, what we should be doing is K through 12. Why are we, this is another sifting and sorting thing. You're actually preparing some people to jump forward.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is one prong of a plan that I call leveraging my senior year. We hear a lot about remediation. And we hear a lot about students that are taking, even though they've been successful in high school, that it's still taking them 5 years to graduate, and those enormous student loan debt.
That's a gigantic difference.
To parents and students, it matters. And so I thought, we have one more year with them. So at the end of their 11th grade year, we have 3 pieces of information that we need to be utilizing. We have their GPA. We have their ACT exam, because in North Dakota, every 11th grader is required to take the ACT test. So we have their ACT score, and we have their state assessment score. And so analyzing those 3 pieces of data, triangulating them, we should be able to figure out which students are on track to take college credit their first year, credit-bearing courses their first year of college, and which of those students would most likely need remediation courses. So using that at the end of their 11th grade year, why aren't we planning their senior year based on that? And we need to be. And so if they're on course, on track to in their GPA, ACT, those 3 pieces of information say, yeah, they're on track, they're mastering it, they're proficient, then let's not let them atrophy their senior year. And that happens a lot.
Is there a teacher issue here? Are schools ready to teach AP courses across the state?
There's a teacher issue, and that's why the first phase of this is to get our teachers trained.
And how do you do that?
The College Board you have to have another certification in order to teach advanced placement courses, and you have to be certified by College Board. So we're working with the College Board trainers, and they will be doing AP Summer Institutes, is what they're called, next summer, and we're starting with laying the foundation in math, science, and English this summer. So that's the very first step, is we train the teachers, provide the course availability, and then there's also a key factor. It's one thing to have a kid take a course, but you also need to provide the necessary supports to both the teacher and the student for them to be successful in it. So there's ongoing support during the year that is built into that. It was built into my proposal of the $1.2 million. Yes.
All right, that's number 2 on Baesler's list. What's the next one? I want you to accomplish your 12-year plan.
And that's 3, and they say work on 3, so
right.
I have 3. And my third and final one is a marriage between skills and knowledge.
Meaning?
Meaning that, okay, so I will start with, a phrase that I've shared with you before in one of our other conversations, and it comes from the Prime Minister of OECD. What he says is this: the world is no longer rewarding young people for what they know. Google knows everything. And to have knowledge for the sake of knowledge is not valuable anymore. The world is only rewarding young people for what they can do with what they know. So he is not diminishing, and I think if we drill into that, there's a lot of people that initially say, well, knowledge is very important, and that's not what he's saying. What he is saying, and what I embrace, is you have to have knowledge, but that knowledge then needs to, it can't just be for your own purpose. That knowledge must be, you must also have skills that go along with that will either solve a problem or enrich society or improve the living conditions of mankind. It can't just be knowledge, rote knowledge. You can't just simply be able to solve an algorithm anymore. There isn't a human being, or a young person at least, that can solve an algorithm or an equation faster than a computer can. We've just been outdone. And so what makes us valuable as humans is to know how to do that equation, that algorithm quickly with automaticity, but then be able to take it to the next step, to solve a problem, to eradicate a disease, or to make it a more beautiful, enriching place to live. But yet those skill sets are forever changing, constantly changing at a rate that we can't even keep up with. You talk to the president at the North Dakota State College of Science, and by the time he gets a grant for technology, in automotive even, it has already changed out in the field. So you have to be able to...
You can't train teachers fast enough to keep up either.
Exactly, exactly. And so how do we begin to marry that skill set with a generation that changes jobs more than any other generation before it?
So how do you?
So here's what we do. We begin to integrate our disciplines, and we don't teach for the sake of knowledge and isolation anymore. And we begin to not teach based on time anymore. You teach based on competency and proficiency.
No, wait a minute. Isn't it math followed by PE, followed by English, followed by social studies?
Right.
You don't want to do that anymore?
No, we don't want to do that anymore.
You're dangerous.
I am dangerous.
You're a dangerous person.
And that is a transformational, and that is my third, and that is why it will take 12 or more.
What makes you think you can do this? We have 200 years of really solid habits that are deeply entrenched. And North Dakota is a red state, but the country is relatively conservative anyway about education. What makes you think you can accomplish this when just to even hear you as an admirer makes me think, wow, that's a tall agenda for one woman?
I think, well, yes, thank you. But what makes me think that we can accomplish that? The spirit of North Dakota. I'm not going to say that the whole nation can accomplish that, but I think we can in North Dakota. I think we're a small enough ship with a large enough source of resources. The most challenging hurdle that we run into is our high school and our university teachers. This is already going on in elementary school because, as you said, in any job that you've ever done in your adult life, have you done 50 minutes of math and then, okay, we're going to go do 50 minutes of...
Of course not.
Okay, so that's the way our elementary classrooms look today. And a perfect example of that is Lincoln Elementary and Legacy Elementary here in Baesler.
Here in Baesler, why are they perfect examples?
Because for some reason, they have that team. They have that team of all of the teachers on that team embrace that project-based learning. They have a principal and a leader that embraces that, and they have instructional coaches. That's a new term as well, instructional coaches. And so you'll walk in and you'll have some people working with the water and looking for microbes and doing some math problems, and then you'll have another set of 6 kids over here that are doing something with some art and they're learning some geography concepts in that. And so with clay and molding, and another kid that is videotaping, and he's going to do a video production of that. So there's just all of these integration of skills that are meeting the standards of math, science, and English, but it's a project.
Do you think I'm being too skeptical? Because I think there are people way more skeptical than I am. I'm just trying to draw you out.
No, I don't think you're being too skeptical, and I appreciate the skepticism because that brings me back from my utopia. And again, as somebody at the department, I surround myself with people that don't see things the way that I do. And we're about to do this this process where are we Northerners, are we Southerners, and we identify, and it's important for you to question me on that. So no, I don't. And these task force people are made up of university admissions people. How the heck do you look at a transcript that isn't measuring a Carnegie Carnegie unit.
Right. What's a Carnegie unit?
A Carnegie unit is semester hours. So you get you get a semester, you get a half a semester, or you get a half a credit for being in one semester of algebra. So at the end of your freshman year, you have one Carnegie unit.
And so if you don't use that system, then how does a college admission group?
We're not the first to do it. They're doing it in Wisconsin, they're doing it in Oregon, they're doing it in Michigan, I believe. And so we brought some of the example transcripts of those states to take a look at, to have a conversation with our university system and our admissions people to say, which of these models do you think works best? Because we're going to pilot this in some of our schools.
So there's a young woman who's 17 named Karen Butler who lives in Carson. What does she need to know in 2025? What kind of person do we need to create to be a full human being, a good economic citizen, a citizen under constitutional terms in 2025? And how is it different from 1995?
I think it's adaptability and flexibility. The C's, creativity. We need to teach them to be creative and to think creatively, to think critically, to collaborate, and to communicate.
Okay, and those are the 4 C's
Those
of
are the
this.
4 C's.
And presumably that's just not language.
No, it isn't.
So behind these, if you can create that person, you think she's going to be equal to the 21st century.
She will, because she will be able to adjust and adapt to what it is that her current present situation is.
So she doesn't know when the Civil War started. She might need to know that.
She might need
but
to
she
know
can
that.
get that like that.
Right.
I mean, you and I
Right.
can, if I asked you any question, you could answer it within 15
Absolutely.
seconds.
Do you know that there's an app that our kids have on their phone that takes a picture? It's called the Math app. Takes a picture of any equation or algorithm and provides not only the answer, but the step-by-step picture of how to write down. So yes, you can get any answer to any question, anywhere, anytime.
So that's not useful.
It's not useful.
So I want to be a learning coach now instead of a teacher.
Right.
Because I used to say there were 3 causes of World War I, take these down, and I had an overhead projector and I pulled the, you remember.
Yeah. Yes.
And that was education,
Right.
because I had the knowledge and you didn't.
Right.
Now you have the knowledge if you want it, but I have to teach you how to do it well, to be discerning,
Yeah.
to be a creative user of these things. How do I do that?
It's a different way of teaching. It's not about starting in chapter 1 and getting as far through the book as you possibly can by the end of the semester. How do you teach that? How do you train that? I don't think it is about training. I don't, because again, I think then we're talking about specific steps that you have to go through. It's about really allowing instructional coaches to be exploratory, to not be confined by 50-minute periods, to let our students be exploratory and have those teachers be facilitators.
Let's talk about bullying.
Okay.
I have a child who was bullied in high school. It's heartbreaking for a parent. We went to the school. They said, well, this is part of the maturation process. They need this. They'll work this out. We had it when we were kids. There's always someone stuffed into a locker, or you've heard this 1,000 times. That bullying is actually maybe a social good, and that if the state tried to step in, or for goodness sakes, the federal government, that would just make things worse, and it gets in the way of the natural accommodation and healing process. So, how do you feel about this?
Boy, there's a lot of statistics out there. There's a lot of, people watching, monitoring, seeing the trends. I don't really pay attention to those national researches or research statistics or the trends, because that doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't matter how many or where the trend is going, because it is happening, and it's happening to someone, and that's someone's child. And even more so, even if the parent doesn't care as much, that is a child that was given to us to protect, to nurture, to help them flourish. And when they are being bullied, they're not flourishing. We are not protecting them. And that is all that they can think about, and that's all I think about. So I don't care what the numbers are. Bullying isn't part of a natural part of growing up, and it shouldn't be. There is nothing, in my opinion, that good that comes out of bullying. So bullying is a really, really big deal to me. It's a very big, important thing. So I don't watch the statistics of a number of occurrences, but I do read about research and why it happens and the long-term effects of it. And one thing that has stayed with me that I have read is that years later, the people that are still most impacted by bullying circumstances and bullying issues that occurred while they were in elementary, middle, or high school, surprisingly, it's not the victim, nor is it even the bully. It's the bystanders.
Those who watched it and didn't know what to do.
And so I think with that knowledge, that is where we have gone as the Department of Public Instruction and our Safe and Healthy Schools unit. If we can empower those people that have the longest term effects to say, hey, this is what you do. And I think that's where we are going to have the most impact in reducing it, preventing it, eliminating it. And that's my goal, is to eliminate it. It's not ever going to be okay if there's just one person. So we work with those kids that are neither the victims nor the bullies, the bystanders, because I will say from personal example or for personal experiences, at our 20-year reunion, our high school reunion, we talked about that. We remembered as bystanders the victim and the bully. And if we're talking about it 20 years later, you know that that's probably a pretty prevalent occurrence.
Why do you think people are immune to the evidence? I mean, you're saying that we're doing a pretty good job of teaching young people in our time, especially here in North Dakota.
Right.
So why would there be this widespread view that the public system doesn't work?
I think because regardless of a couple things, and I'm just speculating, everyone has had at least one bad experience with a teacher or a system.
Of course, I did, you did.
And if not us, our child or our grandchild or our niece or our nephew. And negative feelings last a lot longer than positive feelings. And so when you enter into a debate or a conversation, you remember that negative occurrence more immediately than the totality of events and the totality of the experience. And so I think that partly plays into it. And I think that this generation of parents and grandparents really want a lot more for their own children, and they want there's just this never-ending cycle of our children have to have a better experience than we had, and then the cycle continues. And where does that end? And so until we begin to scale back, and I don't know that I have control over this, about really embracing how valuable grit and perseverance and disappointment is to the total education of a child, and I can't control that.
What does disappointment mean for you?
To not get that trophy.
Not succeed at everything.
Not succeed at everything. To recognize that you absolutely have value as a person, but your value isn't equal on every level.
You can't play basketball.
Right.
You can't spell.
Right, right. And that as parents and teachers and communities, that our role isn't really to ensure success at everything, but to ensure that we're there when they aren't successful to say, that's all right. What did you learn? What can you do different? To be that safety net that I think we need to we're really, and I'm guilty of this as a parent as well, to some extent, I'm sure, where I didn't want my child to experience hurt and bump their nose. And then you get to a point, as a more mature, I look at, well, my sons are 26 and the twins will be 22 at the end of this month, or at the end of July, and I look at the last 5 years, and I'm just such a better parent because I've let them experience hard situations and not rescued them. But I felt once that they were 18 that I was more of their guider and their coach, and I would say as the mom of them through K-12, I felt I was completely responsible for making sure that they were successful. And society did that to me and to my peers as parents.
So let me get really serious here for a minute. And how did you become Kirsten Baesler? You could be working in the cafe in Flasher. You could own a ranch. You could be an insurance adjuster. You could be teaching in a high school. How did you what happened? What are the pivotal moments in your life? Where'd you get your strength? Where'd you get your drive? Who encouraged you to be a winner?
I would say without hesitation, it was my family. It was, when I say family, I mean that all-encompassing through every stage of my life. I was the youngest of 7 kids, and I had a family, brothers and sisters that provided great examples of exactly the way that I want to do things, but also misstepped along the way, and I benefited from their experiences. An incredible set of parents that truly loved each other and were the greatest of example of what partnership and marriage should be, raising a family. And that I saw it every day, and I only understand the appreciation for it as I reflect on my adult life. It just grows and grows and grows each day. So they were, growing up, I knew it was about God, family, country, and community, whatever level that is. And there was always a need to serve. But they served each other, and I'm thinking of all these sayings. It's like, love the sinner, hate the sin. So regardless of whatever action, there was just constant support for that person and constant love for the person among my brothers and sisters. And then when I say family, my own children. They're
very important to you. I mean, nobody doubts this.
No, very important to me. And that, so you have a foundation, but again, just as unequivocally as I said, my family began that for me. Having my children absolutely set the trajectory for me of who I wanted to be, who I was going to become. And it wasn't about Kirsten Schaefer Baesler anymore. It became about, first, my son just transformed my world. It was about, how do I make this world a better place? How do I make sure that his world is a good place? But then it was, how do I make sure that the world that he lives in and the world beyond and his children, that we just make this better, even in our own little neighborhood first, and then our own little community, and now my own state. How do we make that better? And they continue to be my motivation into being who I want to become in the next 10, 15 years.
So thinking of getting the right people on the bus, you said 10,000 teachers in the state. Honestly, if you could snap your fingers, how many would you regard as needing to retire or leave?
I don't know if it's about needing to retire or wanting to leave. It's about desire or even need to really do what this next...
I knew you would say that, because of course you want to bring them along.
I do.
But they're not all going to make the turn. Are there how many bad teachers are there? I've had bad teachers. You had bad teachers.
I've had bad teachers. I'd say, I'll say this. There's not as many bad teachers as good teachers, and I would say that the number is small. The number is small. But with that being said... They
can make a huge impact.
That's the thing. That is exactly the thing. So let's say there's 2% in every school system, every school district. That 2% can derail an entire culture and an entire cohort of students.
And I've been in the teacher's lounge. The jaded cynic can do a lot of damage in there too, drawing people away from their idealism and their hope and their optimism.
Yes. And something that we haven't touched on is building leadership. And so when we talk about teachers and we talk about the number of teachers, it's easier for me to go backwards again and say, I think we have 800 or 900 administrators. And I mentioned just a few moments ago the fact that I worked for a lot of principals, and that was very valuable for me because I had the opportunity to work with so many people, and every manager has their strengths and weaknesses. So by working with so many principals, building principals, I was able to draw on strengths from a large number of people. But what I can say, I worked in 10 out of the 15 elementary schools during my time with Bismarck Schools, and probably twice that number of principals through their retirements and reshifts. And I have seen firsthand that a good building principal can take a mediocre group of teachers and create an extraordinary experience.
Okay, so now let's talk about a really difficult subject, Native Americans. We're so rich in North Dakota because we have Native American populations, Mandan, Hidatsa, Ojibwe, Assiniboine, Lakota, Dakota, Arikara. What a blessing that some states don't have. It's also a challenge for education for two reasons. One is the historic problems of reservation life after the conquest phase of American history. But also, these are separate sovereignties. They're not the Bowman School District.
Right.
You have to have a special relationship with Native American education.
We began today talking about things that wake me up at night with excitement and things that wake me up at night with just a real concern and with a start. That situation is what wakes me up in the middle of the night with
What do you think
concern.
about?
Well, we have a great graduation rate in North Dakota, and our Native Americans are graduating at a 60% graduation rate compared to our 88%.
88 for non-Indians.
88 for overall. Overall. 88% overall. White,
90-something.
90-something.
And Native Americans 60.
Right.
So really sad, but not as bad as it is in some inner cities and so on, but still not acceptable.
Not acceptable. And the surprising part for me is that it doesn't seem to be any worse on the reservations as it is even in our Bismarck Mandan.
So Indians on or off the reservation, Native peoples have harder time.
Right, they're still not graduating. So what are we doing about that? And again, I talked earlier on an unrelated subject about you have to make it relevant to them. You have to make it that, first of all, you have to make learning important and relevant to how it's going to impact their future. And you have to be able to attach a new idea to a previous experience or else they're not going to have, it's not going to stick. And so obviously, Native Americans have a different prior experience than the majority of our students. And they also have a different sense of relevancy or future or optimism. So if we're trying to adjust them to the way that we're teaching, again, it's just not going to work. I don't care if you call it, specialized treatment. It's not specialized treatment. It's about teaching to the learner, and I don't care if that's Russian or Somalian. It's about teaching to the learner. So we've got to come up with a different set of approaches and a different style of teaching that will be relevant and match their prior experiences. We have found that there are some programs that are extremely successful.
Namely?
Career and technical education. And those Native Americans that take at least 2 or more courses in the common sequence of a career and technical education course, I don't care if it's auto body or computer programming, their reading and math and science scores like 30% increases.
So connecting with something that has practical value in their training.
Right.
Not just gives them that skill, but opens doors to the more basic liberal arts subjects too.
Exactly. Why?
Engagement.
Engagement, relevancy, it matters to them. But unfortunately, what happens is those career and technical courses are electives. And so they take their freshman English and they fail. And so their sophomore year, they have to take their sophomore English and their freshman English, which takes a whole other period away. And they can't take that programming class or that welding class.
It seems to me that you have a Native American, maybe who lives in Mandan, goes to a school with mostly non-Indians. The curriculum is really a Eurocentric curriculum with a very light little Indian studies module, if at all. You hear about the Civil War, and you hear about George Custer, and you hear this is not exactly relevant in the same way that might be relevant to your sons.
Right.
Then you have a lot of cultural misunderstanding between natives and whites.
Right.
And native ways are different from white ways. White ways are different from native ways. We share a lot, but there are cultural differences. That's a difficult mix.
It is. So I think we've talked about this before, but you probably don't remember the Indian Education for All. That was one of my very first.
I remember you saying it, yeah.
So the curriculum is just about done. So I unleashed.
What will that look like?
So that is Indian Education for All. They're collecting elder stories, and it's a curriculum not just for Native Americans.
For all of us.
For all of us, because we all need to have that common understanding. So Lucy Fredericks is our Indian Ed director, and she has spent the last 2 years working on this, and she's brought elders together to tell the stories. So there is curriculum for K through 12.
This will be launched soon?
Yes. They're in their second year. I'm not sure what the timeline is, but Lucy just gave me an update on it and said, boy, they're close.
And so every student in North Dakota is going to get Indian education.
Right.
And what will it look like? Stories, traditions?
Traditions, and it's not a separate, again, because we only have 8 hours in the day, but it's integrating that Indian education into our Phi-Ed into our music classes with their tradition and their games and their history, and even into in our reading classes, their literature. And so it's an integration of Indian education for all.
What's the excitement level over this in the state?
As you can imagine, it's mixed.
It is mixed.
It is mixed.
Because?
Well, because there's
time is a factor.
Time is a factor, and there's a sense of wondering why we're not teaching German Russian education for all, Norwegian education for all.
Why are we privileging this one minority?
Right.
You hear this, of
Right.
course. Why can't they get on board? But you're determined to do this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is. I mean, the Native American culture is North Dakota. I mean, the Native American history is North Dakota, and so that
Not everyone agrees with you.
that would probably be true, but a large portion of our state truly is, where they're Germans and Russians and Norwegians and Native Americans.
This is your own initiative.
It is.
And you're going to make this happen.
It's
Montana had a constitutional convention
Yes.
in the 70s, and theirs passed, ours didn't.
Yes.
And now they require Indian education
Right.
across the state. And we've talked about this before. It has been imperfectly implemented, but it's required. And so any school district that protests gets it. You're saying we're going to do this voluntarily. This doesn't need to be a legislative mandate. We are doing this.
Right.
And how will this change things?
Oh, again, education, it's not for the faint-hearted. We can't expect that tomorrow we're going to wake up and we'll wake up in a different world. But imagine that first kindergarten class that is the first class to have Indian education for all. And then they're first, and then they're third, and then there are graduates. They become our mayors. They become our city councilmen. They become our county commissioners, our state legislators, our governors, our senators. And they have that same common understanding and that same common background. That changes leadership, which changes states, which changes direction.
So how are the teachers going to learn how to do this?
Lots of different ways. Professional development, we need to have more professional development days. There is a wonderful woman named Rebecca who works for the North Dakota Council on the Arts, who has become a great partner of ours. And 2 weeks ago, she had brought in a trainer, and we had two different weeks, and we had probably 30 to 40 teachers in each of those weeks. So about 80 of our teachers went through, and it's about storytelling and writing and creating and drawing as part of telling stories. And that we're partner with Lucy Fredericks with this Indian Education for All, because that's a great vehicle and a great mechanism. So it's art and culture and history and tradition, as well as reading and writing and mathematics and science. So
This is going to be something. All right, so let's talk about the giant elephant in the room, which we must talk about, the word that has not come up in this great conversation, the evil genie in this mix, the core.
the core.
The core.
The core.
I was at an event the other day, and I was giving a talk about the past and the future of North Dakota, and I took a question, and a person raised his hand, and he said, I'll tell you what's wrong.
With education.
It's the core.
It's the core.
And I wasn't even talking about education, but his view was, if there's an issue that's going to destroy North Dakota, that's going to give Obama his chance to declare martial law, whatever it is,
Yes.
you know the mythologies that
Right.
circulate around this thing. How did this thing rise up to become the bogeyman of a certain part of the population? And maybe they're right, but
It became political when in 2000. I believe the 2013 State of the Union address, President Obama mentioned it as part of his Race to the Top grant and took credit for it, like it was part of his cabinet's idea, part of one of his
a mistake
initiatives.
then. Because it
Yes.
wasn't an Obama administration initiative.
Not at all.
It came from the states.
Correct. It came from the National Governors Association, who came to my trade association, Council of Chief State School Officers.
So not to beat up on President Obama, but two things happened there. One is that he took credit for something, and therefore it went to it attached to him.
Correct.
And he's a lightning rod in this culture.
Correct.
But secondly, he did tie the Race to the Top funding to a certain, and that really upsets people, because now it's federal incentives to betray our youth.
Right, exactly. And so he tied funding that was already in play to this. And regardless if you were a state that got any of that funding, you were tied to the evil Common Core. North Dakota received $0. We hadn't even applied for Race to the Top funding. We wouldn't have received any Race to the Top funding, and we chose to go with these standards anyway. And there's a certain level of just anger and rhetoric. So, they say, we didn't get any Race to the Top dollars, but you're getting money from the federal government. Well, of course we are. It's our child nutrition program. It's our Title I. We've been receiving that since 1964. So then there's a huge sense of mistrust. So that was the first death spell.
I've been to these lectures. You're teaching collaboration. That is a terrible mistake. Each student should have an individual relationship with the teacher and with knowledge. This is socialism. You're just creating a new kind of a sheep-like population that can be manipulated from the top down. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson have been dropped for obscure African Americans and Chicanos. You've heard it all.
Which is funny because
the evidence doesn't support this.
No, not at all.
So why does this, I've heard people who, if they were here, would walk out.
Yes.
They would denounce us both for this, but they would say, you're wrong. I can show you that we've dumped Mark Twain, and we've added X, and we no longer talk about X and Y and Z. And you've heard this every day of the last 3 years, and you're not going to stop hearing it. Where does it come from?
Right. Where does it come from? It became so after he took credit for it, that was the first thing. Then Race to the Top dollars. I kind of married those two together.
Me too.
But then the second thing that happened is the fight over Obamacare became futile. It was in the court system at that point, and so there was nothing.
Let's shift the culture war somewhere else.
And so,
think?
absolutely. So when Obamacare had to be decided in the courts, and there was nothing else for us to do, or nothing else for the activists to do, but wait, they went from Obamacare to Obamacore. I have to say that I don't want federal overreach. I don't like that the federal government is coming in and telling us what to do on so many things.
But not the curriculum particularly.
But not this. There are so many, and we had a conversation about this in my office just this morning. In 2001, when ESEA was reauthorized under the No Child Left Behind nickname, where was the outcry that was necessary then? Because there was absolute shock that suddenly the federal government was coming in to tell us what highly qualified or highly effective meant in our teachers in our state.
So there's a certain level of partisanship here.
Well, there is, but we wanted to say, so the basic fact of let us control our schools. Not totally control our schools. We receive federal dollars, and there's a sense of obligation that all children be educated at the same level. That is where the federal government comes in, absolutely 100% of the time. Civil rights issues, equity, providing food and funding for basic levels of education. I agree with that. I don't agree with what we should teach. What we should teach.
So now I want you to say this again, Kirsten. I think I heard you say that you are uncomfortable with a significant federal intrusion into state and local education.
True, yes.
Why?
Because I'll take that to the next level. I'm also uncomfortable with me as the state superintendent to an overextension of state intrusion on local education issues, because I believe that the best decisions are made by people closest to those students. They can be more responsive, they can be more reactive, they can be more flexible, because I don't think that you can educate a person in West Fargo the same way that you can in Medora, North Dakota.
All right, so there are people on the far right who just love to use this as a club with which to beat the left, or whatever. And we understand that. That works in both directions. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people in the middle who have been listening to this debate and have anxiety about the core now. They sense that maybe something's not quite right with this thing. What's the most critical thing you could say of the core if you were one of its critics and you wanted to stay honest?
I will use the feedback from my teachers is that they are concerned that developmentally, and I'm not talking about kindergarten development, but once we get into the sophomore, junior, freshman area, those things are now being taught at 7th and 8th grade. And so are they developmentally ready to understand the concepts of the numbers and the equations that we're asking them to do? That's my, I'll have to,
Can you make adjustments here?
Yes. Oh,
So
yes.
you're free to do whatever you. This is not a buy the software, use it or lose it.
Correct.
You can do what you want with it.
We can do what we want with it.
And you're listening.
Absolutely.
And you're listening to your critics.
Yes.
And,
Absolutely.
And your critics come from a range of perspectives, and many of them have deep goodwill about education.
Yes.
They're not just trying to be obstructionist.
Exactly.
Most of them.
That's absolutely true.
And so it's worth hearing them.
Oh, of course. And again, I surround myself with people that think differently so I can grow and we can all grow. How do you know that it's effective or ineffective until you give it some time to be implemented?
So we should see it through.
We should see it through.
Even those who think that it's a bad idea should now allow us to see it through, in your view.
And gather, in my view, and gather some data, gather some do's and don'ts, gather some, this could be better, this didn't work at all. And that's how you pragmatically, and in my opinion, wisely make good adjustments instead of, it's like, again, my dad driving the car. It's like if you look right here, you're going to be making some pretty severe adjustments. Or if you look here, you can just make minor adjustments along the way.
How well has the political establishment of North Dakota, the major figures in our life, supported you in this?
A tremendous support. Not once have I, of the major players, and I mean within my field and in with the political arena, all of them have said, let's go with this. Not once has it ever been suggested to me by people of power or position, have they suggested to me that I should pull out.
So the governor never called you in and said, Kirsten, you sure you want to do this? Because this ain't going to be easy.
No, not at all. And in fact, some people have said, well, it's too bad that the governor didn't get out in front of this, or at least stand up and publicly say, I support this. And it never occurred to me to have that be necessary.
How many at-risk students are there in North Dakota?
By at-risk, the only way that we've been really trying to figure out a way to measure at-risk, the way that we measure it is socioeconomic. And we're about 110,000, I think we're between about 38%.
At risk, that's high. Not as high as some places.
Right.
And you're on it.
Yes.
What are we doing about Asperger's and autism? Enough?
What a new arena that is, and what a spike. And
We're not giving these questions the time they deserve, but
right.
you're on it.
We are, and the legislature, to their credit, is on it.
What are we doing about gifted and talented? Enough?
Not enough. Not enough, which is where the advanced placement with a 1.2, I want to correct that. Gifted and talented, I think through a lot of our other initiatives, they're gifted and talented in a lot of other ways. So again, it goes to my overall comprehensive picture of we're not doing 50-50-50. We're doing project, and I think that'll alleviate it a lot.
So once you accomplish 1 through 3 in your 4 C's, there's still a whole lot of work for you to do.
There is.
I've been talking with Kirsten Baesler, the Superintendent of Public Instruction here in North Dakota. These are the Dakota Interviews. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. I'm Clay Jenkinson.